race. They point to descriptions of a group of divine beings called the Anunnaki, the so-called princely offspring of God, who, according to the Sumerians, descended from the sky.
Our ancestors were given intelligence by a deliberate change of our DNA by space travel.
What if the oldest story we ever told about beings from the sky got one crucial detail backward? What if they did not come from a distant world at all? What if the so-called Anunnaki came from Earth, just not the Earth you think you know? That sounds absurd at first. It should. For decades, the popular version has been simple, seductive, and weirdly comforting. Mysterious figures descend from the heavens, teach early humans how to build, farm, count, and rule, then vanish into myth. Clean, dramatic, easy to sell, but real discovery, or anything that even smells like it, is never clean. It is dusty. It is contradictory. It is a room full of experts staring at the same evidence and realizing their favorite explanations have just gone up in smoke. The whole thing began under a dead city, South Iraq, near the old site of Eridu, where the earth lies flat and pale beneath a sky so bright it feels metallic. Wind moves over the ground, like a hand brushing across old paper. Beneath that silence, a multinational archaeological team had been scanning deep sediment layers with muon tomography, ground-penetrating radar, and something far more experimental: quantum resonance mapping, designed to detect unnatural crystal structures buried under dense clay. They were not hunting for gold. They were looking for a collapsed water management complex older than the first dynasties. Broken canals, storage pits, mud brick foundations, the ordinary skeleton of civilization. Instead, they found a void, not a cave, not a tomb, a chamber, geometrically exact, sealed behind a ring of fused ceramic and black glass, as if the surrounding mud had once been flash, heated to impossible temperatures. That was the first problem. Ancient Mesopotamia had kilns, yes, fires, yes, but not the kind of thermal event that turns river clay into something that looks like volcanic obsidian, poured by a machine. When they finally breached the outer layer, the air that came out had not moved in ages. Dry, cold, and faintly bitter, with a mineral tang that one technician later compared to licking a coin. Their lamps cut through suspended dust, and the chamber walls answered with a dull silver shimmer. Not paint, not mica, thin veins of embedded crystal, arranged in repeating bands, each band interrupted by symbols pressed into the wall, with a precision no reed stylus could manage. The symbols looked Sumerian at a... Then the team got closer, and the room changed shape in their mind. Because it was not writing the way writing is supposed, it was layered, one system over another. Surface marks for language, sub-patterns for mathematics, and microscopic striations beneath both, like the grooves of a record, designed for some reader no human hand ever had. On the floor sat 7 stone cylinders in a basin of green-black residue. Each cylinder a lattice of gold, so pure it bent light with a warm buttery glow. No treasure hunter fantasy could have prepared them for the detail that broke the room open. The cylinders were engraved with star maps, but the stars were wrong. Not wrong as in slot, wrong as in display. Constellations were there, but their positions matched no known Bronze Age sky. At first, the data team assumed precession error, copying error, later contamination, maybe even a modern forgery planted with obscene patience. Then a graduate researcher did what great discoveries usually require. She ignored the label everyone else had already chosen. She stopped treating the engravings as a map of space and ran them instead as a map of time. The pattern snapped into place. You need to picture that moment, because it is the kind that changes careers and ruins sleep. Screens flickering in a dim trailer outside the dig site, sand scratching at the metal wall, coffee gone cold, half the team too tired to speak. Then, the software reconstructs the night sky, not from a different location, but from the same location seen tens of thousands of years apart. Suddenly, the cylinders are not showing where the stars are. They are showing when the stars are. The path of the gods is not a route across the heaven. It is a sequence of dates. And just like that, the oldest assumption cracked. You have probably heard attached to the Anunnaki. Those who came from heaven to earth. It is dramatic. Drama survives better than nuance. But ancient words are dangerous things. They carry shadows. One sign can point to sky, divinity, height, brilliance, authority, or simply that which is above. Another can suggest arrival, descent, crossing, or transition. As epigraphers re-examined the symbols inside the chamber, one reading kept resurfacing with irritating persistence. Not those who came down from the sky, but something closer to the exalted ones who crossed the measure. Cross the measure, not space measure. At first, that sounded like poetic nonsense. Then the chamber produced its second insult to common sense. The crystals in the walls contained isotope ratios that should not have existed in any known Mesopotamian object. Zircon grains embedded in the matrix showed exposure signatures consistent with intense neutron flux in brief pulses, the kind of pattern physicists normally associate reactors, cosmic events, or engineered experiments. One sample even showed lattice defects arranged like data encoding, not natural damage. You heard that right. The crystal structure looked used. Now the room was a battlefield. Archaeologists wanted context, physicists wanted replication, governments wanted silence, social media wanted aliens by lunch. The public argument became instant and ridiculous. One camp called it contaminate, another called it a fraud so sophisticated it would itself be historic. A few very brave, very exhausted researchers proposed something more dangerous. That the chamber had been engineered to preserve information using crystal defect as a storage medium, a concept modern material science has only begun to explore in the lab. If true, the builders were not primitive geniuses receiving wisdom from the sky. They understood matter at a level that should not have belonged to their century. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Buried inside the residue basin are traces of protein fragments, degraded lipid, and a handful of preserved cell trapped within mineral salt. The genetic material was damaged, fragmentary, and close to useless. Close, not completely. Enough remained for comparative analysis. Enough to make 3 labs on 3 continents sit in horrified silence. The fragments were human, not almost human, but not comfortably modern either. The sequences carried combinations of alleles associated with radiation repair, hypoxia tolerance, and circadian instability frequencies, never observed together in any ancient population sampled so far. One marker, linked in theoretical studies to prolonged survival under their shifting magnetic condition, was particularly strange. In current human population, it is vanishingly rare. Computational models suggested it could become advantageous only under environmental stress scenarios. Still in our future, that was the moment the old alien story died in the lab. Not with a bang, with a spreadsheet. If the chamber had belonged to visitors, they were not visitors from another star. They were kin, human or human enough to force the word family into places it did not want to go. And if the genetic predictions were even remotely trustworthy, these people were adapted not to another planet, but to another era. You can feel the room tightening, right? Because this is where the question becomes unbearable. If they were human, then where did they come from? Not from above, from ahead. The new interpretation unfolded like a trapdoor opening under history. According to the working model that emerged over the following months, the chamber beneath Eridu was not a temple in the usual sense. It was an anchor site, a synchronization vault built over a geologically unusual disease-rich, inconductive salt, piezoelectric mineral, and ancient groundwater channels. During the late Pleistocene and early Holocene, that region was not the dry scar we imagine today. It was a lush mosaic of wetland, rivers, and lowland plains surrounding the Persian Gulf basin, a place some prehistorians have long suspected may have sheltered dense human communities or rising seas drowned. Now take that landscape and add one more ingredient: extreme solar activity, periodic magnetic instability, planetary conditions that can, under very rare circumstances, produce localized anomalies in how particles move through rich crust. Modern physics does not hand you a time machine with a smile and a user manual, but it does allow stranger things than most people realize. Space-time is not rigid. Gravity bends it, velocity distorts it, massive rotating bodies drag it. Under intense conditions, clocks apparate. Not metaphorically, physically. That is not fringe speculation. That is measured science. So suppose a future civilization, desperate and brilliant, learned not how to leap anywhere they want, but how to create tiny windows of temporal displacement anchored to specific geological signatures. Not doors you walk through casually, more like narrow synchronization tunnels where information, matter, and eventually living bodies could be transferred across constrained interval at enormous cost. You would not send armies, you would send specialists, geneticists, engineers, agricultural planners, linguists, keepers of memory. Suddenly the stories start to read differently. Beings arriving in radiance, voices like thunder, knowledge of irrigation, measurement, calendar systems, and the statecraft. Lifespans that seemed impossible because the people recording them did not understand time dilation or staggered reappearance. Kings, appointed by higher powers because traumatized survivors naturally handed authority to those carrying medicine, tools, and terrifying knowledge. Temples built in tiers, not merely as monuments to worship, but as geometric stabilizer, artificial mountains designed to interface with the sky's electrical charge and the earth's mineral resonance below. And Nibiru? That famous name dragged through so many documentaries and late-night theories? The chamber may have settled at too, though not in the way anyone expected. A recurring symbol, once thought to mean a rogue planet, appears in mathematical context tied to crossing points, interval, and transition. Not a wandering warp, a point of passage, a threshold, a place where trajectories intersect. In plain language, the Anunnaki did not come from a planet named Nibiru. They came through a condition. That is the paradox. The oldest gods may have been remembered as extraterrestrials because our ancestors lacked a better category for highly advanced humans arriving through a process that looked supernatural. The sky was not their homeland. It was the direction from which their technology announced itself, and there is something almost tragic about it. Picture early farmers standing beside reed marshes at dawn, mist lifting off the water, the smell of wet clay and fish and smoke. Then a tone hums through the air, low and impossible, like the earth itself has started singing. Light spills across a stepped structure where no light should be. Figures emerge in layered suits that mirror the sun so brightly you cannot see their face. They speak through translation membranes, and their words come out amplified, flat and enormous. Of course you would call them divine. What else would you call a human being wearing the future in front of your eye? But if this theory is right, why return at all? Here the story turns darker. The crystal wall records, once decoded as best as they could be, did not describe conquest. They describe triage, crop failure, water salinity, atmospheric instability, population collapse, repeated references to the thinning shield and the burning skies as civilization, fighting as environmental unraveling so severe. It had begun to redesign itself genetically just to survive. Their return to deep antiquity was not imperial. It was desperate. They were searching for earlier, more resilient branches of humanity and for ecological conditions not yet destroyed in their own age. They did not come to rule the past. They came to borrow from it. Let that sink in. The beings ancient people praised as creators may actually have been refugees. Not master, survivor, not omnipotent, terrified. Their knowledge would have looked like magic, but their motive may have been painful human. Preserve what can still be preserved. Store seed, archive language, stabilize bloodline, teach enough agriculture and astronomy to delay collapse by century, maybe millennia. Build networks of memory that could survive flood, war, and forgetting. You are not listening to a story about perfect sky gods anymore. You are listening to a story about descendants who came back to beg history for another chance. And yet even that was not the final shot, because hidden beneath one of the 7 cylinders was a wafer-thin disc-fused silica, etched with concentric grooves too fine for the naked eye. Under coherent light, it projected not text but moving geometry, a simulation. At first it looked abstract, spirals, branching lines, pulsing nodes. Then the pattern resolved into coastline, sea levels rising, river channels shifting, settlements blinking on and off like dying neurons. The Persian Gulf basin flooded in state. Population centers migrated north. Then, in the upper corner of the projection, 7 markers remained fixed, each aligned to a later temple city. 7 anchor sites. Eridu was only one. That partial resolution opened the door to a new fear. If one vault existed, others might too. Under silt, under cities, under places that now hum with traffic and power lines and unexamined foundations. One projected marker appears close to ancient Ur. Another near the old course of the Euphrates. A third sits under a zone now buried beneath modern infrastructure no one is eager to excavate. The implication is chilling. The chamber at Eridu was not a singular mirror. It was part of a network, and networks are made for reuse. This is where the scientists split again. Some argued the system died with its maker. Others pointed to persistent electromagnetic anomalies measured seasonally around 2 predicted sites, faint but statistically annoying, like a machine in sleep mode, refusing to go fully dark. Instrument drift, critics said. Urban interference, wishful pattern matching. Maybe, but one sensor package installed near the Eridu chamber recorded a recurring pulse synced not to daylight, not to temperature, not to human activity, but to sidereal time, the Earth's rotation relative to distant stars. Read that sentence twice. The dead chamber kept time against the cosmos. By now, the old question, where did the Anunnaki come from, had become almost embarrassingly small. The deeper question was far more unsettling. If they came from the future, what exactly did they leave behind in the past? Teaching, yes. Stories, yes. But perhaps also tools, dormant systems, encoded warnings, buried inside myth, where only a civilization advanced enough to rediscover the underlying science would finally understand that. Maybe that is why the legends are so contradictory. Maybe they were never meant to be read as literal chronicle. Maybe they are memory vaults in narrative form, sealed in the only encryption early humans could preserve across thousands of years. Story, ritual, symbol, repetition. You do not need every farmer to understand tensor geometry. You need them to keep rebuilding the shape of the platform. You need them to track the star. You need them to pass down the names. And here is the part I cannot shake. In one translated fragment, damaged but legible enough to haunt everyone who saw it, the returning ones described the people of the wetland not as subjects or inferior, but as the first stable garden, not primitive, stable. In other words, from the perspective of the future, we are not the crude beginning of history. We are the lost balance they could not keep, the origin they could not outgrow, the healthier version of themselves. That flips the whole fantasy its head. All this time, popular culture asked whether ancient humans were visited by advanced beings. The chamber suggests a crueler, more beautiful possibility. Advanced being may have looked back at ancient humans with envy. If this interpretation survives, then the Anunnaki were proof that humanity needed outside help to begin civilization. They were proof that civilization, pushed far enough, might one day need help from its own beginning to survive. The old hierarchy collapses. The builders of ziggurats were not children waiting for sky teachers. They may have been collaborators in the largest rescue attempt ever attempted across time. Of course, none of this closes the case. It detonates. Huge pieces are still missing. We still do not know whether the transfer process moved bodies, moved stored minds, or used some hybrid biological reconstruct. We still do not know how many returned, how long they stayed, or why the system failed. We do not know whether the flood tradition scattered across the ancient world described natural disaster, the shutdown of anchor site, or both. And we definitely do not know what sits beneath the remaining 6 markers. But one clue keeps researchers awake. The final ring of symbols inside the Eridu chamber does not describe an revival. It describes a schedule, not we came. We come when the measure opened. Present tense, repeating. So now you have to decide what is more unsettling. The idea that ancient legends exaggerated ordinary kings into gods, which is the safe answer. Or the idea that under the first cities of human history lies evidence that our descendants reached back through physics we barely understand, were mistaken for data, and left behind a broken map to the places where they may try again. And if one of those sites reactivate, what then? Do we greet them as ancestors, as warnings, as refugees? Or do we finally understand that the oldest beings in our story were never above us at all, but ahead of us, staring backward through time, hoping we would become wise enough to recognize our own fate? You tell me, if this pulled the ground out from under everything you thought you knew, subscribe and follow, because the next story goes even deeper into the buried network. The drowned gulf and the message hidden in the second chamber that may explain why the first burned in silence.